Okay. Hey, Steve. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Well, it's awesome to be here with you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I think, there's so many different things that we can talk about, and, your life work speaks for itself, frankly. And it's something that I think has helped a huge number of people and professionals just get a grip on, a little bit about the human mind and the human condition and psychology. And your work really penetrates into all kinds of fields, and it's absolutely fascinating. So I'm looking forward to our chat today. And I actually wanted to start off with a little bit about consciousness, right? It's kind of a little bit of a hot topic in the sciencey psychology discussions these days. And one of the areas that you've written and spoken about is the separation between your consciousness and your mind, in the sense of like your consciousness is always witnessing what's happening in your mind. And we're typically more inclined to believe our mind is true and dominant and like that's the way it is, right? So I was hoping you could, perhaps give a little bit of an explanation of how you see those two things as different.
Let me start a little bit before that and work up to it, because I think consciousness is kind of essentially the story of evolution, period, end of story. I think consciousness is what's evolving, but we need to be not get too spooky about that. We
Yeah.
kind of look at that more in a monistic way. I wouldn't say in a materialistic way, but in a one world kind of way. And I think of consciousness, as simply um, the degree to which you're in contact with the world and your own reactions. And if you think about it that way, the simplest single cell organism has some fraction of consciousness. It's not what you and I would recognize as the word conscious, and we probably wouldn't quite speak about it that way,
Yeah.
but it's a continuum, that you have sensory organs. Are you able to respond to your own history? Well, that's evolved. I mean, if you take something like just learning by association, you might
Hmm.
say being aware of, being conscious of the fact that this situation is like an older situation. Well, that's 545 million years old.
Hmm.
We pretty much know that because all of the organisms that evolved since the Cambrian, which is 545 million years ago, half a billion years ago, do operate in classical conditioning. They do learning by association, learning by contingency, and none of the organisms before. That evolved.
Hmm.
Before that, you had habituation. You could stimulate an organism over and over again, and it would stop stimulating or increase the stimulation, depending on the nature of it. That's a little older. But, something happened about 400,000 years ago. We know that it's not more than 2.8 million years ago. Why? Because there's something that happened is something that your 12-month-old baby does that the language trained chimps don't do. And if their 12-month-old baby doesn't do this, they don't develop normal human consciousness.
Hmm.
What developed was a two-way street between symbols and events. I mean, it starts with just a name. I mean, if you just take a baby and you say glass and hold this thing up, glass, hold this thing, present an object, say the name, present an object, say the name. After just a few trials, you say to that baby the name, and it'll, you know,
Hmm.
orient its little head to try to find the object. It turns out it takes training to do that. You're not born with it. There's a critical period where it begins to emerge. If you don't do that, if you don't create a two-way street, um, you're going to be in real trouble, and somebody's going to have you better find a good psychologist. I would say, with my disciplinary hat on, find a good behavior analyst who knows something about my work, because
Hmm.
literally you can save that child's life if you can train it how to develop a two-way street of what the first phenomenon is called an equivalence class, being able to derive that a name for an object is bidirectional and then can combine. And if
Right.
you learn that the French word for a glass is X, and I don't know what it is,
Yeah, me
uh,
neither.
French to English, it'll give you a three node network, and on it goes.
Right.
More and more and more things that are derived. Well, as you add that with babies within 16 months, we'll add not just same, but different. So they begin to learn by, I hear an unfamiliar word, I look around, I find an unfamiliar object, I put them together. And opposite and perspective taking, I'm here, you're there. Now then, before and after, better and worse, a nickel is smaller than a dime. I mean, you break away from formal relations, which chimps and many organisms have. Certainly, we're part of a family of primates who are pretty good at relational learning, but not arbitrary relational learning. We're the only ones. We're the only ones.
Yeah.
And once you do that, you're conscious of the world in a different way. I mean, I can say, if you go down to the hall and turn to the right, you'll find the bathroom.
Right.
Well, you are now at a different level of consciousness, defined as the degree to which you can interact with your insides and your outsides and the consistent relationships among them. Now, the question you asked then stands on that foundation, and perhaps I can take a breath and try to answer your actual question of what's the difference between mind and consciousness, because it's an extension of what I've just said. But
Right. So I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, right, humans have this ability that starts at about 12 months where we manage to symbolize things. I suppose it's not exclusively to the external world, but it's often externally, driven, where we can symbolize that or represent that internally in our minds and make connections between an object and the symbol that we have, which would just be a thought, right? And then beyond that, we're then able to relate and think about those thoughts together such that we can create representational or symbolic worlds internally, so that when you say to me, or if I ask you, I'm like, oh, how do I get to this place? And you say, oh, you just go down here and there and there and there. I know what that means, even though I've never taken that path. And that's different.
You might be able to picture it in your mind. You'll be able to recognize it when you go there, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
The network that gets created, it becomes gigantic.
Right.
I mean, it isn't just learning names for things. I learned that the same name can be two different things. This is a glass. These are glasses. I can, and as I begin to do that, when we do the math of it, you have more possible thoughts in your head than there are molecules in the universe.
Wow.
Just do the math. I'll walk you through it. It's not hard. And, it's spectacular ability to expand our ability, our consciousness of, or possible, our ability to create even consciousness of things that have never happened. Like the world would be like this if we did that.
Yeah. That future projection.
Exactly.
Or fantasy.
The seed of consciousness that we're talking about with this witnessing, noticing, observing self, that I think comes from a combination of things that start out as one of these relations, but then they form into a collection. And let me explain what I think's going on. Yeah, you start with names and difference and opposite and all of that, but you also begin to be taught things that require perspective or point of view. Very hard for children. If I say to a young child, what did you have for breakfast? They will sometimes say what their sister had for breakfast. What is I in that sentence? If I try to talk about here and there, it's very frustrating to young children, because when you go there becomes here, and here becomes there. And it's like, would you make up your mind? I mean, come on. There's not many things that are like that.
Yeah.
They have to be trained only by demonstration, because unlike, like an object, I can show you, a glass. How can I show you here?
Right.
How can I show you left or right or up or down, now or then?
Concepts.
And these kinds of are perspective taking concepts. Become deictic concepts. The big ones are time, place, and person. Well, when you begin to learn, I see this, but you see that. Here, this is happening, but there, that's happening. But if I went there, that would become here, and then here, this other thing would be happening. And here I am here right now would be there, and this other thing would be there. When I begin to be able to move consciousness around, like what's going on in the Ukraine?
Right.
What
It is
it's like,
very interesting. It's so
yeah,
interesting that we can do that and that it's something that's learned, right, and
right.
developed. Where,
The seeds of it are
yeah.
we come into the world with some theory of mind skills,
Hmm.
even before we get language. You have a sense, for example, of the intention of others because we're the social primates. We emerged in small bands and troops, and we had to have that.
Hmm.
When your mama's eyes meets yours at birth, you dump endorphins, natural opiates, because it's really important that those eyes be important, and it's really important, and mama dumps them too. And it's really important that she does it because she's going to, and he, dads, and so forth, because we're going to have to take care of these rugrats for like years before they can function independently. I mean, they die almost instantly if we didn't. Oh, such a sweet baby. Look at that baby, and getting a little parental high from that connection. Well, my point being, this beginning of perspective taking and of
Hmm.
connection and of understanding intentionality is there before language, but it's built out by these I, you, here, there, now, then. Now, what happens around 3 is I, here, now comes together. And I, here, now am interacting with the world, this observer perspective. And at that moment, we hit infantile amnesia. The other things that happened to you earlier disappear from access. They're still in your memory, but if you've ever raised a child, all of a sudden, the Thomas and his tank engine song can't be remembered. It's gone
Hmm.
because we have a different consciousness where everything we know, this is a glass, is known in the context of I, here, now, knowing it, but it's connected to you there then know something different.
So, what is that switch that happens, and why is there that amnesia that happens? Like, I don't quite understand that
because
perspective shift.
because what knowing from a perspective or point of view, not just doing, not just let's use the word seeing. This is if you're a Skinnerian, you'd know this is the way Skinner talked about it. And it's not just seeing, but see that you see.
Hmm.
But then you see that you see from a perspective or point of view. I don't mean logically. I don't mean you're saying thinking in normal words. I mean the fromness of awareness becomes cognitively established. This dimensionless point of I, here, now that extends in consciousness to you, to the future. What about my grandchildren if we don't do something about climate change? What do my ancestors think when they look at me from heaven? Being able to extend across time, place, and person into this more kind of oceanic awareness, like the psychedelic therapists call it, because when you interfere with the narrative sense, I'm like this, I'm 73 and I'm wearing a blue shirt, into this dimensionless point of awareness, that dimensionless point is so profoundly different because it has no edges that you can be conscious of. That aspect of consciousness has no qualities, and it has no distinctions, and it has no edges.
Hmm.
Like, where have you gone that you're not there to go? I mean, what do you know that you weren't there to know about? So
Right.
there is something in your consciousness, in your defining consciousness, the way I started, in your ability to interact with the world and yourself in a way that allows you to see the relationships among those. There is this one odd feature that happens with I, here, now, where there's no edges.
Right.
Not thing like anymore. It's no thing. It's everything. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's spiritual. You go look up the word spiritual in the dictionary, and it's one of the few words that is defined negatively. It will say not material.
Hmm.
And look up what that is. It comes from a root word that means wood or timber, and it's this. It means not thing like. So
Right.
we find this spiritual sense of self, this more spiritual consciousness that is always different from the kind of consciousness that is thing like. that can, this is a glass and this is not a glass. That's different from just I hear now.
Right. And I suppose that element is, I mean, it's in all of human history, right? You just look at spiritual and wisdom traditions, and that's what the great teachers and mystics have been trying to tell people. But, because we're trying to explain it to other minds, it's very complicated. And that's why you get all these negative definitions being like, well, it's not a thing, but it's an experience, but it's not really an experience, because we're trying to understand it analytically, when it's perhaps not something that can be understood analytically, except experientially. And again, it's just a lack of a word to be able to explain it.
You can't create the word that'll explain it, because the words will divide, they partition, and we're talking about the oneness of awareness. And so, you smile because of the immediate kind of paradox of, they tried to explain it. Well, there is no it. And you're trying to use the very tools that interfere with this on the one hand, and yet the very tools that expanded this on the other hand. That the fromness of awareness doesn't need to be talked about to a dog or a cat, but their level of being able to move perspective along time, place, and person, imagine futures, and to remember pasts in different ways that don't have any current stimulation, or to be able to put their consciousness behind the eyes of others. A dog or a cat doesn't know how to do that. So we've evolved a level of consciousness that has given us a new kind of consciousness, and it's based on words, it's based on symbols, it's based on derived relations, learning arbitrarily to relate events, and especially these ones of I, you, here, there, now, then. But it's kind of broken free from it in a way, and it's spooky what it does. I used to hear the language of it, what it does, what this set of skills does. It's spooky in the sense that it establishes something in our experience which can only be described through languages like spirit. And it connects us in consciousness with others across time, place, and person in a way that in certain times, through intense spiritual experiences, can be replicated pretty easily under certain circumstances. Psychedelics is a good example. But so is great distress. So is enough pain. So is exhaustion. So is an illness. So is meditation sometimes. So is lots of things. You break into a space in which these break down. They break down because they are connected. Let me explain what I mean.
Sure.
If I say something like hot, what comes to mind?
Heat. I mean,
okay.
Hot iron.
Okay, good. I'm going to say it in a different way, but listen to my tone. Hot.
Hot dog.
Oh, okay. You haven't played password when you're,
No.
Okay, I'm going to do it this way.
Let's try again.
Hot, cold.
Oh, I see.
Long,
short.
Exactly. Okay, so you have connections that are dependent upon relations that are not just ones of sameness, that are in the meaning of the things that you're talking about. You didn't get here without getting there. There would be no here without there. Do you see it?
Yeah.
And it's very hard for children who don't, language disabled children. They don't get here. The last one to come in of time, place, and person is time. Kids don't get, you're going to be scolded when your dad gets home. You might as well just talk to the wall, because they're not able to deal with temporal extensions like that. Yeah. But when you get that time, place, and person, at certain times, you can do just like you do with hot and cold. It's on a continuum of temperature. If I say something like, what's the opposite of cool? You'll say warm. You won't say boiling. You kind of get it.
Yeah.
Well, if there is no here without there, there is no that now without then, verbally. Also no I without you.
Right. And is this like related to, I don't know if you've ever read Martin Buber's work, I, Thou,
Yeah.
where he talks about this kind of relationship of like, there is no I without you, right? There
Yeah.
is no object without subject.
Yeah.
Is that sort of the
It is
essence of
related.
what you're saying?
It is related. And no, the only thing that we really add to the conversation, this is based on
Hmm.
relational frame theory, is that we've developed the measures, the analytic units, and the training programs, because we can take kids who don't have that sense of self, kids on autistic spectrum disorder kids, for example, who don't go behind the eyes of others, who don't show empathy when something bad happens to people who are important to them. But it turns out you can train it. You can train it just like you can take developmentally disabled kids and train them that the name for something is a particular name. With enough effort, you can train I, you, here, there, now, then, and something shows up. And what shows up is what your dog or cat doesn't have. It's this new kind of consciousness.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, one of the things that also shows up as soon as you have that is pain shows up.
Yeah.
The first time I ran into this, we were teaching you, here, there, now, then to a child who didn't have sense of self, didn't have show empathy, made spectacular gains, talked to the mother, said that wonderful things are happening. I dropped my plate, and for the first time ever, my son said, "Mommy, are you sad?" And she almost started to cry. I said, he's never, ever, ever shown any knowledge, but he is getting in trouble now. And something odd is happening to him. He was in fights at school and he's asking me odd questions. We said, what? Like what questions? He said, he came home and he said, "Mama, what does tard mean?"
Hmm.
The kids on the playground were calling him a retard. And
Yeah.
for the first time, he was aware of it. So this kind of consciousness asks us to hold in consciousness the whole of our history. And awareness you should come with a warning. If you're going to work on your mindfulness skills, you're going to feel the suffering of the people in Ukraine in a different way. It won't be just something you see on the television. And those spiritual books, the Buber being one of them, will warn you of that.
Yeah. And it's true. It's that double-edged sword of like, well, you get to experience all the everything, but it also comes with tremendous pain, and trying to avoid that, causes other kinds of problems like ultimate numbness or whatever it is. And it's a really strange phenomenon. And I mean, I've heard you speak about this before, where you talk about how modern civilization, with everything that we've done and all the remarkable achievements, and how we're probably better off by every measure of living, and yet anxiety and depression and suicide are higher than they've ever been.
Yeah.
And it feels like the mental suffering is greater, and that's this consequence of being able to, that's what we get, right? It's the good with the bad.
Well, I think we can manage that if we're clear about what the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
But we think that we're going to solve it by the problem-solving mode of mind, by the critical, judgmental, evaluative mode of mind that gave us the ability to talk across several thousand miles right now, or gave us the ability to see what's going on in Ukraine, or to talk to your friends far away, or you got something 1,000 times more powerful than what landed people on the moon in your pocket. But we haven't given modern minds to people for this modern world. And it turns out you need several things together to be able to manage it. I mean, I'll give you an example. Objectification and dehumanization of others, prejudice, stigma, things of that kind, and enjoying being with others, we know depend on at least three things. We've shown it in the lab, we've shown it in our studies. We call it this flexible connectedness model. You have to be able to take the perspective of others, or you wouldn't enjoy being with them. You have to be able to feel what it feels like to be them. So not just take their perspective, but actually have it, take on some of the emotional reactions. And you have to not run away when it's hard. If you can't do that, you can't have friends. You don't enjoy being around people. You You have this what called social anhedonia. People are not of importance to you unless you have those three. But here's what's happened in the modern world. The camera will force on you the perspective taking. And if it's done well, the stories will force on you the empathetic reaction, at least the similar emotional reaction. When you see that bloated body of the 3-year-old that fell out of the boat as the Syrians tried to escape the war to Greece, and then the camera comes in and the mother weeping over the body of her dead son. You got the first two of the three, but you don't have that last one. You haven't helped people not run away when it's hard. And so we had in Arizona not too long ago, just a few years ago, adults standing in front of a school bus full of children, immigrants, trying to come into the US screaming, "Get out."
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because they don't know about the suffering. They know about the suffering. It's that they don't have the capacity to take it on. So if we don't create flexible hearts and modern minds for this modern world, you're going to see this paradox get wider. And I think we're seeing it right now. We're seeing a harshening of our political culture.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing the rise of authoritarianism. We're seeing brutality that is amazing going on right now in Europe. And what's the other horrors that can come if we don't find a way to don't just give people more and more and more information, more and more exposure. If anything weird happens in the world, you can see it live on the screen in front of you. Give people the psychological flexibility that's needed to carry that burden of consciousness.
So it is the problem or the difficulty, I don't know how you'd like to phrase it, that, while we, generally speaking, as a human species, let's say at the moment, we can kind of empathize with everyone, but something gets in the way and we don't want to deal with the harsh realities of it. And so we'd rather run away because it's easier and it's a defense mechanism. And I mean, we do that with ourselves all the time, right? We shut things down. We don't want to deal with bad memories or anything like that. And it's even easier with other people, arguably, because you can just shut your screen off, or you can just not talk to that person, or you can run away. And then this weird sort of phenomenon happens where, as you say, it this like objectification of people where you don't see them as people anymore, right? The dehumanization, sorry, where you're like, oh, it's the enemy or that group of people, and you don't see them as humans. And history has shown countless examples of how well this ends. And, even though we know that, and we know that we can even like know that and know that we're doing it and perpetuating it and yet still not do anything about it.
Yeah, because we have to do our homework and we have to do a better job. And our leaders and parents have to do a better job. It's no longer optional.
Yeah.
Because we've advanced so far with the problem-solving mode of mind that can give you some of the elements of this more spiritual witnessing, noticing, observe, and describe mode of mind. You have both.
Mm-hmm.
Or, language contains both. You can look at a sunset and notice, say, wow, without adding anything, without saying, but it would be better if it was a little more blue. You know enough just to shut up. In front of a crying child who you have compassion towards, you may know to just hug the child or say, oh, that's so hard to hear, and not take a step like, but look at the bright side, or you're kind of bumming me out with all these, so we know, even without training, we have the beginnings of it, but we need to train our minds to be able to carry the burden of consciousness that we, through our technological advancements and our problem-solving mode of mind, has now created orders of magnitude more exposure to joy and sadness, to amazing, mind-boggling acts of creativity and horror simultaneously. That requires, your kids are going to need to be little baby Buddhas, or they are going to suffer enormously because the amount of the suffering that comes from the combination of exposure to pain and judgment without the capacity to carry pain and judgment in this other way that requires reining in the problem-solving mind. You
Right.
have to put the mind on a leash. If you don't know how to put the mind on a leash, it's going to just claim that it's you and take over your life. And what you'll apply to your problems are going to make your problems worse.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to solve it by just enough medications. Well, yeah, you can dampen down, but then you were at the point where if you go out and catch fish in a freshwater stream, you're going to eat antidepressants.
Hmm.
It's 1 out of 4 women in the last year were on antidepressants.
Wow.
It's insane what we're doing. And when you look at the long-term effects, the sexual side effects and so forth of that level of medication, I'm not holding forth against meds done properly, limited times, tapered doses, used properly. But to just, dump this into our bodies in the hopes that we can, muscle through the years of our lives, that's a tragedy. I
And is
don't think it's that hard to get enough in there. You have to be, I'm kind of amazed by how small a little bit of flexibility training, a little bit of mindfulness training. If I can give you an example, the World Health Organization took ACT, distilled it down to a cartoon book and audio tapes, tested it with South Sudanese refugees in Uganda, Syrian refugees in Turkey, and showed that just a 6-hour program run by people with minimal training and high school degrees, with groups of people sitting in dirt with nothing but the clothes on their back and their lives. That's the only thing they had left from escaping the wars that they'd been through. Were able to reduce the development of the so-called mental illness, I don't like that way of talking about, by 50% at the end of follow-up. So just a little can do a lot, but you have to be taught how to put your mind on a leash. And our wisdom traditions have been doing it for eons. We just need to figure out how to do it really fast. Not meaning that that's going to give you all of what a meditation practice for 10 years is going to give you. No, it's not, but we can give you a finger hold to be able to crawl up.
get started.
To get started.
Yeah.
And those set of skills are becoming pretty clear. I don't want to say Western, that's great, but experimental science
Mm-hmm.
given us pretty good knowledge of what the tools are. And they're in the ACT work, my work, but not just that, they're in lots of different work. And time's up. It's time to put them into the heads and hearts and hands of everybody.
Now, how do you, I guess one of the problems that we kind of run into is, you have to sort of be aware and willing and wanting to do this, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, it's not something that can be forced upon people. It has to be taught really grassroots level, for lack of a better expression. But I suppose it comes down to the framing of why you're doing it and what people can get out of it. And, it's really more of I don't like to use this expression, but it's a marketing issue of like, how do we show people that this will benefit their lives infinitely more than maybe not anything else, but it certainly will be a great help and tool for them to use for their futures. And it's really remarkable that what you had just said about that 6-hour training that reduces the negative outcomes by 50% in the long term. That's unheard of kind of intervention, right?
It is, and actually, it's the only fully psychologically scalable intervention that the World Health Organization has on its website. If you want to get there and bit.ly links, just put in WHO, all capitalized and underline, and then ACT, ACT, bit.ly, WHO, underlined ACT, all capitalized, and you'll find it in 21 different languages. And they say, basically, this is good for anything that stresses you, regardless of situation or person. It's pretty crazy, something I would never write about. It's a program called Self-Help Plus, which is this ACT-based program. But there's other things out there. But what's coming, I think, is the the knowledge because we know what the processes are.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of different techniques and, heroes and traditions and all that kind of stuff. And they're all fighting for space. And a lot of that's very kind of, there's an ego piece to it and all of that. And I can feel it even in my own prideful talk about my own work, but really what's underneath it, what's most important is what are the processes. And there, I think it so simplifies. There's not 110 different ways. You need to learn to be more mentally and psychologically open, to be able to come into the now with attention that's flexible from this witnessing or noticing sense of self, and then to use that openness and presence to focus on what your values are and how to build habits around them. That's it.
Easy peasy.
Mostly extend that to others. So
Yeah.
you take acceptance and turn it into compassion, take being able to notice your mind and turn it into genuine communication and listen to the opinions and statements of others. If you extend it socially,
Mm-hmm.
if you engage in health practices that make sense, diet, sleep, and exercise, that's everything that we know in
Right.
100 years of psychological science. And how do I know that? Because we did a review recently of every single study that ever did the proper statistical way of looking at how change happens in a randomized trial. Every single one, 55,663 studies that we
Jesus.
read twice and scored. It's under review right now. And I can tell you that 85% of what we know easily fits into the 6 things I just talked about.
85%.
Yeah. And if I get a little more flexible, 100%, emotional and cognitive openness, attentional flexibility in the now from a witnessing self, focus on your values and build habits around it, socially extend it and take care of your health. That's it. So it's not that hard to learn. It's only 8 things. You can learn this and you can start. Now, you'll never be finished. You'll never be finished because the subtleties of it, the combinations, the new situations that emerge, and how does this apply? But, science is here. Behavioral science is here with answers that we can use. Now, the profound part of what you said earlier is the person has to be ready. And the single most important form of readiness, ironically, is pain.
Mm.
Usually not ready until you've been punched in the nose several times. And if you've ever raised children, you understand it. Try to talk to a teenager who thinks that they've got the world by the tail about something that's coming, that's coming, that you wish they had the wisdom that you had, that you might as well go talk to your doorknob. I mean, life's going to have to punch them in the nose, but you can plant some seeds that might be there. And here's the sad and the kind of interesting thing about pain. Has anyone lived through the last 2 years of what's going on with COVID, pandemics, the immigration climate, economic disparities, war? Has anybody been awake over the last 2 years who isn't in contact with a significant amount of pain?
Yeah. No.
Nobody.
No.
So
Maybe some tribes in Africa, but other than them,
Yeah, maybe someone in the Amazon or somewhere, maybe the few, but no. So
pain is abundant.
Pain is universal now. And so, and there's some brilliant things that are a little off, in a way, but when John Kabat-Zinn, called what he did stress reduction, of course he knows it's really not about stress reduction. And he called it something else, but nobody came. And he called it that and everybody showed up, so.
It's how we see it.
We got to market it in a way that allows people to connect, not the possibility of a pain-free world. Maybe just a few months of experience with this, and this is why our young people look at this and say, man, there's no future. Our birth rates are plummeting. I don't want to bring other human beings into this environment. Yeah. Not that it's pain-free. That's never been promised. The wisdom teachers have always said it can be suffering-free, not pain-free. And suffering is something different. Suffering is something you add to pain.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get sick. You're going to die. You're going to see people that you love die. that's going to be painful. It's built in to life.
It's built into the program.
It's part of it's part of the program, necessary part of the program. We wouldn't evolve without it.
Yeah.
And suffering is optional. The way we mean it, which is probably not starvation, probably not being stabbed through the heart by a malevolent person. It's probably mostly love and loss and the pain of seeing others in pain, and of knowing about your mistakes and feeling guilty and shame-filled about things that you've done that violate your own values, and on it goes.
And anxieties,
Anxieties, worries, the future, managing the future in a way that, you're talking to a panic disordered person in recovery, and ACT really comes out of that. And I've lived in that world where even, the next few minutes are terrifying.
Yeah. And I think that, and we live in a world where, and I don't know why this is the case, but we're so pain aversive, right? And I mean, I guess it's very understandable, right? Pain sucks. It's not hard to understand that part of it, but we've reached a point, and perhaps it has something to do with this sort of so-called instant gratification culture, where we're looking for quick fix solutions to everything. And maybe it's because there are some in sort of loosely in the world sort of problems, you do have quick fix things. You can, if something's wrong with your phone, you can phone the IT department, or you can do this and it's fixed. And so we're like, okay, well, I want to do that with my brain because there's a problem and I need to solve it, and I want to solve it quickly. And that's what you were saying, right? Is it's like you can't problem solve the problem solver. It doesn't work that way. You got to learn to manage the problem solving aspect of your brain from this deeper or higher perspective, being in quote unquote control, even though it's not really in that much control. It's more about accepting everything that's happening and learning to manage it, and aligning with the values that you have in terms of how you want to deal with it, right? Because it's not going to be the same for everyone, because people have different values, and that's the beauty of the diversity of humanity, right? And there will be conflict, and it's also, that argument that you said, and about that a lot of young people say that, I don't want to bring a child into this world because it's so cruel. I mean, I empathize with that view, but I also think about the fact that it's like, well, technically, particularly for me, right, being in a first world country, and it is a very sort of privileged position, being like, well, life's been better than it's ever been, despite the fact that we now have, you see, and as you say, the problem is that with our internet access and the way that our social media algorithms work, in that we pay most attention to the things that upset us, and that's a consequence of our negativity bias. It's partly the company's problem, but they're just doing business or whatever. It's not the topic for today, but so we see all of the worst things all the time, live and in graphic detail a lot of the time. And so it feels like it's happening everywhere and all around us, and it's just not.
On almost any objective statistic. I mean, even we're talking about the privilege of being in the developed world. Yes, true. And there's less starvation, less violence in the non-developed world than there ever has been in human history.
We live in the least war time. There's been less wars in the last whatever few than there's ever been. And
you live longer, there's less malnutrition, etc. I mean, I'm not saying, please don't send me an email saying, you understand what's happening here. And I say, yeah, I do understand that, but step back and just say, oh my goodness, have we made progress? I mean, yes, there's still slavery of a sort in the world, but the world itself is pretty clear. Slavery is just not going to be allowed. And the very fact that we can say, but it still exists in this way, and people go, oh my goodness, is the sign of progress. And on it goes. You pick up, and yet there's this other piece, and you can never solve this other piece with the same problem-solving mode of mind, because this other piece is caused by the problem-solving mode of mind.
Right.
It is the problem. So the solutions that we think are going to apply to one set of problems and create another set of problems. And with regard to, for example, your own pain that you carry, of course we have that judgment. It sucks. Yeah, but pain is historical. We're historical beings. Time doesn't heal things. It just covers the things over. And in the right mode of mind, you can go back to things that happened to you as a kid and weep. You've done it. I bet you've done it.
Yeah.
You go back to things that happened to you when you're in single digits of years and you weep at what has happened to you and maybe even at things you did. They'll be with you. They'll be with you till you go to the grave, because there is no delete button in the nervous system short of brain injury, which is not something to wish for. You know, plugging into the matrix chemically or otherwise is not something to wish for. So here's the problem. That mode of mind that says, I'll solve a problem solving, actually creates it. Because if you're not willing to have it, you've got it. If you're not willing to lose it, you've lost it. If you're not willing to lose love, you will grasp in such a way that people run the other way. Now you'll produce a kind of love that isn't the kind of love you really. If you're not willing to have the pain of loss, you can't have the joy of connection. You can't afford the risk. So, you know, yeah, pain, we want to get rid of it. Okay. Pick a form of pain, a sadness. I hate sadness. Okay. Well, I got a call 3, 4, 5 years ago. My mother was in day 3 of pneumonia and had done a turn for the worse. And I ran to the airport and got on that Southwest flight to Phoenix and got that rental car and tore through the streets, hoping not to be pulled over, and got there just in time that she shook her head when my sister said, Steve's here, Mom. And then I watched her breaths space out, her feet turned black, her kidneys shut down, and a final gurgle, and she was gone. That was enormously sad. And I would pay $100,000, I would pay $1 million for the privilege of having been there. This problem-solving mind is so effing stupid. Within 2 weeks, according to our current diagnostic system, you can be put on antidepressants if that still makes you sad.
Yeah.
Can you get any more anti-life than that? You know, you don't have a space even to grieve the death of your mother? Are you out of your mind? And the answer is yes. We as a culture are out of our mind, out of this place in which we can create a table that can hold your experiences fully, without needless defense, with dignity, with awareness, and to be able to learn. You don't get wisdom any other way. So if you want a pain-free life, you've just embraced the most anti-life idea that we know. How do I know that? 65% of the suicide notes say, when I'm dead, I won't hurt.
Yeah.
It starts at age 3. You can get suicides at age 3. The first ACT book had the first lines in the book, 1999, were a 6-year-old girl threw herself in front of a subway train today. The authorities said her mother had recently died of a terminal illness.
Jesus.
You think about how small a kid is who can deliberately throw herself in front of a train because she'd rather be in heaven with mama than to be suffering here. So the problem-solving mind will give you the most horrifying anti-life solution if you let it run. You better learn to put it on a leash.
Right. A life without pain is no life.
It means no life. It means life's not possible. Life without suffering, that's a different thing. That we can earn by learning what we need to do to settle into this other form of consciousness, to go back to where we started, more spiritual awareness that will hold a moment of pain a clean moment of pain and a moment of joy equally. Can I tell you something really horrifying? One of the most horrifying facts about all of the work that we've done in ACT and psychological flexibility that has to do with this, why would you even learn it? And I was trying to make the argument that you need to, because you're exposed to pain constantly. But I want to flip it and give you the most horrifying fact that it was new to me. It emerged in the research.
Sure.
If you're not open in this way, this more mindful, you might say, I sometimes connect to Buddhist traditions and so forth. I don't mean just that, but this part that's in all of our wisdom traditions, this more mystical, spiritual, hold it all, show up in consciousness, come into the present moment, focus on what's important, and get engaged in life way. When joy happens in your life, you will diminish it as fast as you can. If you can't do that, when we follow people and we look at what happens to, let's say, a person who's highly experientially avoidant, highly fused with this problem-solving, wagging finger mode of mind, this problem-solving mode of mind, unable to go into the present because they're disappearing into the past and future with rumination and worry, buying into the clown suit of I'm a person who's like this, I'm a person who's like that, I'm great and grand, or I'm the miserable lowest of the low, whatever the form is. If that's where you go, when joy happens, you beat it with a stick, you push it down. Because the bigger you are, the harder you fall, and this joy will go away. And I can show it to you. You know, those folks who are in that no frame of mind that comes from problem solving being misapplied, when somebody says something sweet to them or invites them or asks them or appreciates them, and joy goes up, it then goes boom down. You can't savor, you can't taste, because you're immediately going to go to compare, predict, evaluate, judge, and you know there's another thing that's about to happen. That joy is going to go down. You're not going to always be wanted. It'll eventually go away and so on. So it isn't just the pain of seeing suffering around the world. It's the pain of a life not being lived that even allows you to look at that sunset or to smell that flower or to kiss that loved one.
Yeah. No, it's truly a, you know, a tragic way of being. And depression, you know, it sort of is the name that we call it when we're in that sort of zone, right? And I've been through that, and man, it's fucking rough. And you know, but you're right. It's because everything that goes up must come down, and you're like, it's too risky to get involved in this potentially joyous situation, because what might come of it is either you think, right, it's not real, but you go, it's either going to be too painful or too hard, or it's going to make me more depressed, or blah blah blah, and then you're just like, it's better just to not deal with any of it, right? And then there's the avoidance.
And the problem-solving mind, which is trying to protect you from that pain, will produce that pain.
Yeah,
which
unintentionally.
then confirms that it's right, which means that you have to keep doing it. Yeah. Just as the panic disordered person, you know, oh my God, I'm going to have a, you know, yeah, and that's exactly the conditions under which you will. You know, the conditions under which you will going to self-amplify into this kind of hurricane called a panic attack, or this depressive downturn as you spin down into I can't feel land. And, you know, if you look at so-called antidepressants, which is a marketing term, it's a lie. You know, yeah, they lift the bottom up, but do you know they lift the top down?
Yeah, everything just condenses.
We're not talking bipolar. No, we're talking about joy and appreciation in a normal range comes down, and you now can be the happy numb. The happy numb is not happy.
It's just numb.
It's just numb. And yeah, you can stop, you know, slog on, but that's your vision for life. You're going to slog on and hold your breath until it's over. Really? Just say no. And so there's another way in. You asked why? Well, one or how to reach. One is pain, but another is the absence of joy. And there, you can sometimes reach people who really want to savor, appreciate, etc. And if I can say, and I know it'll sound like I'm just a child of the 60s, but I am hopeful with what we're doing right now with psychedelic therapy. Because one of the things that's cool about that, there's a chemical that, what does it do? It blasts open those gatekeeper functions that allows this narrative sense of self, which is dominating parts of the brain that it didn't even evolve to do. It's like a parasite, it's controlling them, and it's filtering out sensory or motor information so actively that anything that doesn't fit your narrative self, your conceptualized self, isn't even able to be perceived. You literally don't even know what your fingers, your eyes, and your ears are doing. And you can show that with fMRI studies. You can show it's like what happens with a cat if you put a mouse in front of it. And you can show that if you make even a loud noise, the cat filters it out at the brainstem because it's got the mouse. We can be hanging on to this concept. Oh, I'm the lowest of the low and the worst of the worst. I'm best of the best. I'm the grandest of the grand. I'll make the world great again. Whatever the thing is, narcissism or self-loathing.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't, we're like a person, starving with a banquet right in front of them, and you don't even see it. And
Too focused on something else.
so maybe we'll find some ways. Maybe it's silly of me to think that proper use of psychedelics might be helpful. After all, the indigenous people for many, many, many years have done this with proper wraparound and so forth. If not that, what we're doing with meditation and mindfulness. I mean, why is that everywhere? Now, true, we've created something that didn't exist before. We now have selfish mindfulness. Yeah, we've created that in the West. Thank you very much. I just saw some data out of a study that we've been working on, where we're writing it up right now, on self-compassion, compassion for others. Do you know we now have created selfish forms of self-compassion?
What do you mean?
They naturally tend to extend towards compassion towards others. If you look at people longitudinal in a big data set that we have, and we start looking for what happens over time, if the constellation is one of self-soothing, and it's kind of in some of these self-compassion, after all, I'm part of common humanity, blah, blah, and it's not connected to compassion towards others, towards love towards others, etc., which, warning, if you do that, you're going to find pain and suffering around you. Open your eyes. Look at the people in the grocery store who are not buying the fancy cheeses you're buying. They're looking at the prices of the mac and cheese macaroni thing. Look around you, dude, and you're going to see right around you. Then the next day, people who don't have what you have, well, if you're not doing that, what happens is the link between self-compassion and life quality, life satisfaction starts going away over time. You're doing self-soothing. You're not doing so. You probably can take even ACT and turn it into like, a fast food act that has negative effects. I do believe one thing that's cool about ACT is those 6 that I said.
Yeah.
I'd say it's like 6 sides of a box. Don't just focus on one side of a box, because if you only had one side of a box, you wouldn't have a box. You just have a square.
Yeah.
Put them together, you get them aligned, and they're strong. If you've got a weak side, a floppy side, a missing side, time to be working on that side. It's an evolving thing. You'll never be finished. So, it's not a speedometer glued to your head, but it is a task you have. And so, yeah, emotional openness and cognitive openness. Yeah, presence in the moment consciously. And yeah, values and habits linked to it. All of those go together. And when I see people doing mindfulness or, selfish mindfulness or selfish self-compassion or something, when I almost, or people doing, if I just earn my way by caring for other people enough, then I'll be happy. No, you've got some inside work to do. What about the things you've done in the past that that you think are really unworthy of you? You've never done anything shameful, really? What about the things that have happened to you that are painful? You're not going to, just by being Mother Teresa, wipe that out. So you're going to have to do all 6 sides of the box. And by the way,
Balance.
health and social extensions. So if we can figure out a way to get the whole set into the hearts and minds and hands of people, I think we can create modern minds for this modern world.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And, it's so fascinating that it's like you can take any one of these things that are designed or shown to prove and improve your life. And it's like, oh, you need to be more self-compassionate because it doesn't help being really mean and authoritarian to yourself. It's silly. I mean, it's not by choice, but whatever. And yet, if you just do that in isolation too much, it's going to flip over and it's going to end up being narcissistic or something like that. Similarly with like mindfulness, if you're like only focused on the present moment and that's 100% of whatever you do, well, then everything else kind of, you're just not engaged in other things. You're just not making decisions anymore, and it's unbalanced. And so it's really about finding the balance in each of the 6 sides of the box. And then when it shifts out of balance, which it will, because that's how life goes, you rebalance as best you can. And then it will go, another one will go out of balance, and then you rebalance that one. And just having the sort of like, it's understanding of like that this is a process, right? And there's no end.
Well, that process focus simplifies, and it's not an infinite number of processes, and they apply almost everywhere. So if you learn it here, even though your mind won't easily tell you how to apply it over here, when you finally get to the new place and you look, these same sets of skills will empower you. So whether or not you're talking about running a business or winning a gold medal in the Olympics, or helping to deal with a cancer, helping yourself with a cancer diagnosis you had, or being there for people that you love, or dealing with past anxieties, or you have an addiction problem, or it turns out, and this is part of that big study we just did, turns out these processes apply to everything. So it's not a one-size-fits-all technological solution. It's that we are not so different and so complicated in our common humanity that we can't learn this set of skills we need to be able to work with and through the various kinds of challenges that we have in our life. It's not an infinite set. It's a manageable set. And, no, you're not going to always be skilled at it. The story I usually tell is what happened when I developed tinnitus, because I was an old punk rocker, and you don't want to stand in front of 60-foot tall speakers with people screaming like aircraft engines. But I loved it, and saw all of those bands back in the day, and then became interested in trance, so did a little more of it. Well, now I get ringing in my ears 24/7. And it took me 3 years, all the way up to having a suicidal thought and doing the stupid things the audiologist told me to do and all that, before I said, wait a minute, that's a suicidal thought. I think I'll just apply my life's work to it. It took me 3 years to it occur to me. And then it took me about a 2-hour walk to handle about half of it, a week to handle 100% of it. And we've now done randomized trials on it. We can teach people to manage the distress. And by the way, there's going to be an explosion of it because all these kids, look at what they have in their ears.
Yeah, like this.
Yeah, exactly.
In my ear, I'm pointing to now for anyone who's listening. Yeah.
Morning, when you're 73, I'll tell you what it's going to sound like.
Yeah.
Well, so, life punches me in the nose over and over and over again, saying, dude, because it doesn't seem like it's the same thing. It's, oh, this is different. No, I think psychological flexibility and its social extension and extension to health, in whatever name. I'm not trying to be grabby. I'm not singing an Act Uberallis song. I'm not. Whether it's emotion focused therapy or cognitive therapy or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, on and on it goes, whether it's this tradition or that tradition, it's all fine. Focus on the processes. And one of the things I've been trying to do with my colleagues is work out some things like apps where you can just say, what are the processes over the last 3 hours? Did I do anything that gave myself an appropriate outlet for my emotions?
Right.
I mean, if you're interested in emotional openness, you have to find places where you can feel and where that is worth your attention. Often that's with others, people that you love, being able to talk about what you feel and what's going on inside you, right?
Yeah.
We can squeeze this down. So we do this thing, these app, give me a month's worth of data. We put it in a complex network analysis that analyzes just you. It's not a commercial because it'll be a couple of years before this is available to normal folks, but I hope within about 6 months it'll be available for free, by the way, to unless you wanted to do fancy stuff, to clinicians. But what gives you is, okay, what's happening is when this happens, then I do this. And we know from the data that's a toxic process. Watch out. And sure enough, when I do this, I then do that. And when I do that, here's what I get that I really don't want.
Yeah, the cycles.
My joy goes down, my sadness goes up, my entanglement with anxiety goes up, whatever the thing is. So maybe we're at a time technologically through wearables that isn't just self-reports. We have already in some of our early studies really, really cool things. Like, for example, if this thing's not moving around a lot, your life probably isn't expanding in a happy way.
Well,
nice little study, just looking at the GPS
of your phone. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not moving around a lot, if you're just sitting in one place, that's a little warning sign. Or here's another one. If you're not with other people regularly in your life, it's probably not heading to a happy place. Or heart rate variability. You know, if you're showing the signs of inflexibility, you know, the polyvagal system and so forth that occurs when life is safe, you know, you see a different pattern of heart rates. Then life is scary. And so we're not very far away with wearables and diary kind of things where we can maybe dive in and say, for you, not a bell curve in comparison to others, you know, enough of that. For you, here's how life's working. And these processes here, you don't quite have that fully worked out. You could really work on your attentional flexibility, or you could really work on your values focus, or you could really work on your emotional openness.
Wow, that would be amazing. And really the sort of individual focus is, I think, the key to it, right? Not the standard deviation analyses.
Well, if we had time to talk about that, I've been digging into why have we bought into these normative categories, and it is a horror show. We've been doing it for 150 years from Galton's standard deviation forward, and we've been trying to predict how our lives go by where we fit on a bell curve that is determined by comparisons between people, not within people. And it's mathematically impossible. I can walk you through the data and the reasons, but it's mathematically impossible to go from your place on a bell curve to a prediction of your life over time. Everybody believes it's not. Everybody believes that if, I got into the gifted and talented class, that is predicting your trajectory. And it's not true. It's false. It's driven by, frankly, Galton's eugenic dreams. I mean, these early statisticians, if you don't know that they were all eugenicists, you need to know they were all eugenicists. And what they were doing with those tools is to figure out, you know, it's racist. It was probably not evil intent, but it's definitely racist the way it landed. Figure out, you know, who should be having children and who should not in order to, you know, eliminate criminality problems, et cetera. No, what we need to know are what are the processes within people that produce a developmental trajectory that looks like that instead of that. And yeah, people's developmental trajectories are going to be different. Some people will win a gold medal at the Olympics, and some people will just have a healthy heart and be exercising well. But excuse me for living, I don't see people come and want treatment from me if their life is on an upslope.
Yeah.
They're usually not saying, oh, it needs to be a slope like that.
Things are going too well for me. I don't know what to do.
If it's on an upslope, it's usually okay. And maybe we can learn, and if we can learn how to get on the upslope, maybe we can learn how to accelerate the upslope. And
Yeah.
who knows how much prosperity is possible in the world if we start thinking of our own psychological development in a process way, very much the way that we're learning to, I think, with our physical health, or also, I think some of the best business people and so forth have learned to do with organizations and so forth. So I don't know. I'm an optimist. I
Yeah.
really do think we can manage this. And with it, climate change and immigration and prejudice and stigma and economic qualities, all of which are psychological problems. They're not technical problems. We know how to solve climate change. We know how to solve starvation. We know how. We have the science. There's enough for everybody. All of these things are manageable. What we don't yet have is the technology of consciousness that has been deployed and talked about in a way and reach people at that moments of willingness, either through the presence of pain or the absence of joy or something else, or maybe they're just ready to learn. Maybe they just really want to be high performers or something. I'll take any motivation.
Yeah. And no, true. And I do think that there's so much hope in where we're at, and it will be fantastic to see it all come together. And yet not without its challenges, right? As that's never going away. They'll just change, and we'll learn to deal with those, and we probably don't know what they are yet, but that's just how it goes, right? Because otherwise there's no evolution, as you say. And so to look at that as a good thing.
When you say learn to deal, you just said a challenging word, which is learning. Learning is challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody likes being in the place where you're
A
kind of
beginner.
don't know how, where you're a beginner. Yeah. And beginner's mind, there is a joy of acquiring competence. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't be able to walk. If you're able to walk, children fall in a diaper about 110 times a day on average, and they walk 10 football fields while learning how to walk.
Wow.
You got through that. So you have enough persistence to experience the pain of that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before your first step. Surely you can take your first step towards a different kind of consciousness that allow you to enter into this problem-laden world, but also this amazing opportunity-filled world where you can talk to anyone around the world in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Think about it. Let's take advantage.
Unbelievable.
Problem-solving mind has given us as opportunities, and learn to put the mind on a leash in such a way that we can, live a life that is worth living.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And I encourage everyone to check out your books and your website. And I really wanted to thank you for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege. If you have anything to promote, please do.
Well, if they want to follow me, be on the newsletter thing, go to Stephen C. Hayes. I use C, the middle initial, because a mass murderer named Steve Hayes. So, and when he first did his crimes, my picture went out from AP because he's old, ugly, and bald. And so they took my picture and said I was the mass murderer.
Oh,
so
damn.
I'm not Stephen Hayes, Stephen C. Hayes, Stephen with a V, middle initial C for Charlie, Hayes. www.stephenchayes.com, and say yes, please send it to me, and I'll send in my newsletter. I don't spam. It's a one-click opt-out if you ever get tired of me. But yeah, it's not too hard to follow the work because it isn't just me. Psychological flexibility, acceptance and commitment therapy. There's 4, 5, 6 million books in print from 200, 250 authors around the world.
Yeah.
You can find it. And if something I've said in here resonates, like a little part of you says, it makes sense, well, give it a go, give it a chase. An easy read, I will mention, it's a book on my shoulder, A Liberated Mind. Wrote it a couple of years ago, tells the whole science story. And once that, you can see, okay, it's really worth learning. It won't give you all of what you need, but then it's easy to get on the internet and very inexpensive self-help books, or the Who link I told you for free.
Yeah.
How about that book?
And I'll put all those links in the description. And I highly recommend the books. I've read them, and they're the Liberated Mind specifically, most recently, and it's great. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon, hopefully. Take care of yourself.
Thank you, Shane. It's been awesome.